speaker, who is Jeffrey Sachs, who is currently in Paris, and he's probably a dinner speaker there, so he's having it both ways. Jeffrey and I go back a long time. In fact, when he was an undergraduate at Harvard, I was his junior tutor. And nevertheless, he stayed in economics, and he is now here at Columbia a number of years. He is now joining us from Gay Paris. All right. Jeff, it's all yours.
Ellie, thank you very much, and thank you for not saying to me that. I appreciate it. Can you see me and hear me okay?
Yes, you're coming through perfect.
Good. If you could turn the mic down on your end, I'm getting the echo back. And
I'll do exactly that.
Good. And just send me a text note if something goes wrong with the connection, because I'm going to try to put on, if I can find it, oops. Yeah, now, oh, there it is. Try to put up a little quick PowerPoint. This is a great issue. I'm glad that your center is taking it up, and I know you have a lot of skilled, very experienced and knowledgeable people about this subject. I look at this as a general macro and development economist, and so I'm going to give you my views about this question of internet and jobs, both whether the issue is real and whether it's big. And of course, I'll be talking more than the internet. I'll be talking about information and communications technologies more generally, and including all of computation, robotics, artificial intelligence, all part of the digital revolution. And my bottom line, which I'll start with so that it's not a matter of suspense, is that I think this really is a very big deal. I think it's going to have significant implications for jobs, for income distribution, and for public policy. Like any technological advance, the potential good that can come out of this is enormous. So I'm a technophile and a techno-optimist, and in the debates in the economics profession about secular stagnation and whether we are seeing sharply diminishing returns to technological advance and so forth, I wouldn't believe any of that. I think we're in an incredibly dynamic era. I do see ICTs as the great general purpose technology of our time. I think the revolution that they create is, I don't know if it's quite as big as the steam engine and electrification and the internal combustion engine, but it's somewhere up there. This is a very big deal. ICTs will touch every sector of the economy, and like every innovation of machines since the start of the Industrial Revolution, will have major impacts on income distribution, social organization, the organization of work, the distribution of income. And I do believe in the aggregate that machines eliminate jobs, net, and that on the whole, that's a very good thing, in that we don't really like to work. We especially don't like arduous physical labor, and machines have incredibly diminished the amount of arduous physical labor that we have to do to stay alive. So we're on our way to sharply reduced work effort on the aggregate, and ICTs should help that. So that's my starting point. On the other hand, like most technological changes, there are losers. And there's potentially, ironically, the possibility of pervasive losses from this technology. I have, in the past couple of years, published 3 papers which have the property in an overlapping generations model that a pure technological advance in machine productivity leads to a permanent, sustained loss of well-being of all future generations except for one, which reaps short-term benefits followed by long-term losses. But all three papers also make the point that that outcome is not inevitable. Public policy can easily take the situation of technological improvement and ensure that it is Pareto improving for all generations relative to the baseline, which is almost a meta theorem of economics, which is that if you have a pure technological advance and relatively low inefficiency cost redistribution, everybody can be made better off by that technology. And that's how I view ICTs in general, that they could lead to cascading problems, but that they also give the potential for cascading benefits. So I see ICTs as having this potential, and I've left behind a little PowerPoint, which I don't really need to use very much, but the next slide after the first one just says that ICTs are key to achieving sustainable development, which is of special interest for me, that ICTs are especially important in combining economic progress and primary resource saving. So they are a great technology for enabling improvements in productivity that are also resource saving because they dematerialize a lot of the economy. And that's extremely important. In this sense, they can raise the well-being of current and future generations. And then the third slide just says that like previous general purpose technologies, ICTs can be enormously disruptive. They can cause significant changes in income distribution that can lead to a decline of well-being for parts of the population today and in the future. So we need to have public policies that are essentially redistributive alongside this burst of GPT technologies. And we should remember that in every previous advance of machinery, there have been significant losers. Engels was not imagining things when he did his famous study of the living standards of the English working class living in the new satanic mills. I think it's quite arguable and quite realistic that for a lot of the English population, the first decades of the Industrial Revolution were near catastrophic. It is certainly the case that the invention of the spinning jenny and the shuttle loom led to mass unemployment in India, for example, among spinners who were almost every rural household. And so there was a lot of deindustrialization that took place because of machine innovation. And we know that cotton picking, for example, when it was mechanized in the 1930s and 1940s, dispossessed the sharecropper society of African Americans. Now, they were living in misery, but after that, they were living in misery without employment and basically made a mass migration to the north, which found jobs in wartime industry, but not necessarily in post-war industry. And there were huge dislocations that came from the mechanization of cotton. Were they net good in the end for society? No question. But a little bit of redistribution would have gone a long way. Now, on slide 4, I just point out that, of course, there are gains for consumers. In first instance of consumer surplus, there are, on the production side, a substitution of smart machines for labor, primary commodities, and increasingly human capital. So we always want to separate raw labor, the kind that used to dominate in the economy, from human capital of various sorts. And one of the most interesting parts of the current revolution is that all kinds of labor will be displaced by machines. That on the whole is good, because if it was just one kind of labor, the chance for that class of labor to suffer hugely would be much greater the fact that some doctors will be displaced as long as together with some clerical workers makes it much more likely that on net there will be gains in the society from these technologies. Slide number 5 just makes a partial listing of the incredible number of ways that ICTs are affecting jobs and affecting the economy. They're penetrating every sector of the economy. Dematerialization of goods, e-commerce, new forms of entertainment, metering, remote sensing, monitoring, surveillance, unique identification, materials and energy efficiency, payments and finance, HR, audits, compliance, of course, CAD/CAM, robotics, precision motors and drives, self-regulating networks, self-driving vehicles, machine-based R&D, machine learning, self-serve kiosks, cloud computing, location awareness through GPS and mapping of all sorts, big data and data analytics, and all the process of outsourcing has been incredibly facilitated by the internet. So all of these are pretty deep processes, but they do say that the effects are likely to be quite pervasive. Now, my view is this will eliminate a lot of jobs and on the whole for betterment of humanity. And I do believe that the story that it's a fallacy that machines eliminate jobs is a fallacy. We're taught the lump of labor fallacy that, okay, if people lose jobs in one sector, they pick them up in another sector. But actually, if people, quote, lose jobs in some sectors because of higher productivity, they're going to take part of that in leisure time, part of that in retirement time, part of that in more education effort. So it isn't true that jobs get replaced one for one. And in the most recent BLS time use survey, I find it remarkable that for American adults 15 years and older, although we don't necessarily think of 15-year-olds as adults, but except after their bar mitzvahs, I suppose. The fact of the matter is that average work per day is now 3 hours, 8 minutes for people that are 15 years and older. It used to be 10 hours a day for such people. In fact, 10-year-olds and 5-year-olds also had 10-hour workdays at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So we're down to 3 hours, 8 minutes on average per person. That means that jobs really have been eliminated. Now, what's true is that if you look at jobs for people at work, on average, they're working 7 to 8 hours. But the fact of the matter is that a shrinking portion of overall society has to work because we're so productive that we can support non-work activities. So of 15-year-olds and above, only 43% are actually engaged in work, and 40% of 8 hours is exactly 3.2 hours. And that's where we basically get the 3 hours, 8 minutes. The majority of people are either in education or retirement, or some in unemployment, down to about 5.5% in unemployment. A lot of people, unfortunately, in the US are locked up in penitentiaries. But the amount that we need to support an incredible standard of living, $50,000 per person on average, is only 3 hours per day of work. Most of that work, by the way, is not physical work, because the amount of work that's in physical labor has almost disappeared, whereas at the beginning of the 20th century, it was almost everybody's work was farm work or physical work in construction or in mining and so forth. But agriculture and mining together is 2% of the labor force. And if you add in construction and manufacturing, and you look at the production occupations, it's something like 8% total of all occupations in the United States are now engaged in production. And then there are probably a couple percent more that are engaged in hard physical labor as porters, people carrying things. But Machines are great. We should really like them, and we shouldn't. And we should understand that part of what ICTs will do is create more leisure time. On the next graph, graph 8, I tried to think through. This is a thought experiment, not an econometric experiment. The kinds of jobs that are likely to be displaced in the ICT revolution, and the number of employees by the millions in those various occupations. And I have the first 5 categories of jobs: raw laborers who are doing physical work, probably 2 million Americans; production and craft workers, it's about 8%. I'm sorry, it's 19 million workers. I misstated. That's about 13% of the labor force, because the total labor force is 142 million people. Production and craft workers, administrative, sales, HR, and accounting workers, transport and material moving workers, and maintenance and security workers. My guess is that all of those professions will be crowded out or substituted by machines to a greater or lesser extent. And that the jobs, arts, design, and media, probably pretty much neutral. And then there will be increasing gains of jobs of personal services, professional services like health, education, legal, and so on. Definitely a gain of management work, because we're managing complex systems, and a gain of engineering and science, which are really complementary to the machine age. But if you add up the sectors that are likely net gainers, it's not a majority of the labor force. I would say a majority of the labor force is probably in occupations that are going to see an inward shift of the labor demand schedule, meaning that even if the jobs didn't go down, the wages would go down. Now, we're already seeing this, in fact. If you look at occupational change over the last 100 years, I show you on slide 10, if you skip to slide 10, that sales workers, which were a rising part of the economy, now have started to have a decline from the 1980s onward. Unfortunately, I don't have this picture after the year 2000, but I would guess that the sales workforce is really falling now in absolute numbers because of e-commerce. If you look at clerical workers, they peaked around 1980 or 85, and they're being displaced by computerization of office processes. And I would expect that that kind of decline would also accelerate. If you look at slide 12, professional and technical workers, which are now about 25, well, actually reached about 25% of the workforce in 2000, and probably around 30% of the workforce now, are on a significant upward path, because professional and technical workers are complementary to ICTs, not substitutable, at least not now, though we're starting to hear of small niches of even medical doctors. I was just hearing about histology being replaced by expert slide reading for biopsies and so forth. So we know that it's starting, at least. Now, I find slide 13 quite interesting. I tried to find a time series of earnings of unskilled workers, and I'm sure that a good one exists, but I couldn't easily grab it. So what I did was grab the real value of the US federal minimum wage. So this is the inflation-adjusted federal minimum wage. Now, I grant you this isn't purely a market phenomenon, but it's probably not bad at tracking the unskilled raw labor remuneration in real terms. And you can see that actually for 65 years, there's been no rise of real compensation. That's incredible. If you think about the rise of per capita income during that period, it's probably a 4-time rise since 1950. but no increase in absolute terms. This isn't relative, this is absolute terms in the federal minimum wage. And I think that that shows you that machinery really, really, truly can displace labor. And it has basically gutted the demand for unskilled work. And unskilled work, therefore, doesn't rise with the tide. And unlike a Cobb-Douglas production function, in which all factors increase with technology, more sophisticated production functions really do displace large classes of labor. Slide number 14 is representative. It's well known that the higher skilled work has tended to have a rise of real earnings. The lower skilled, and this is not skilled, but educational attainment, median male earnings have been on a downtrend since about 1980. So there has been an increasing bifurcation according to skill levels. And what I think is happening now is that the high school degree and the even basic bachelor's in some fields is really being replaced by smarter machines at this point. And I think that the tendency, therefore, for exacerbating the wage inequality is quite real. The next graph, slide 15, shows the average earnings of bachelor's degrees for ages 21 to 24, according to the major that they had in college. And what you can see is that the high-skilled remuneration are for the technical professions and management. So it's architecture, engineering, computer, statistics, math, health, and business. And then when you get to general, good, liberal arts education, remuneration for a BA is much lower. And I think that this also is pointing in the same direction, that the labor market is not rewarding the same kind of general skills that it used to, because the quality of the machine, as it were, continues to rise. Now, what you would expect is two kinds of income distributional effects. One is within labor, and there the skilled, unskilled differentials and where that cutting off point is has been changing. And second, you would expect the functional income distribution between labor and capital to be shifting significantly with the rise of capital share. And we are seeing that in most economies. Capital share in the national accounts has been rising. We have a small but very active part of the economics profession asking the question of how much of this is statistical artifact by how things are counted, and how much really is the rise of the share of returns to capital. I have no doubt that if you added in human capital with machine capital, we've had a very, very significant share of income rise of capital rather than relative to labor. And to my mind, it's not surprising that this is being capitalized in the information technology sector. And we know, this is just a recent graph, that about 32% of stock market capitalization is in information technology and financial sector, but probably 1/3 or less of the labor force in those two sectors. So there's a tremendous shift of income to capital that's already being capitalized. Three key points about technological improvement with redistribution that is, again, relatively low cost in terms of efficiency effects. Everybody can be made better off, so that losers can be compensated by winners, future generations can be compensated by the current generation. I mentioned that I published 3 overlapping generations models in the last year, showing an interesting phenomenon, and I'll just run through the thought experiment in 1 minute. Suppose you have a rise of robotics that reduces the demand for labor. And since people want to be employed, that shows up not as unemployment, but as a lower real wage. for workers. Consider an overlapping generations framework in which young people have labor to sell and save and accumulate capital for old age. What happens with a shift of robotics productivity is that the old generation that owns the robots, in essence, gets a big boom of well-being because that gets capitalized in the value of their shares. Whereas the young generation is basically put out of business because its raw labor really goes down in market value significantly. So the old get a big boost and the young suffer, which doesn't sound so wrong relative to the current labor market environment or social environment. And then in an overlapping generations model, since saving for retirement comes out of the labor income of the young, it turns out that all future generations lose from this technological advance because every future generation earns little when they're young as laborers and therefore saves little for their retirement. So you get a paradox that one generation, the old that are alive at the time of the boost, benefit, and all future generations lose. Now, it's easy to overcome that through income redistribution. All you have to do is tax the old, subsidize the young, and basically do that for every future generation. And you can make all generations better off by virtue of this technological advance. So that's the most basic point, that these are good changes. Don't break the machines. Ludditism is not right, except in pointing out that there are big social stresses that can arise. I have three key points to summarize in slide 17, and I'll stop there. First, that the more generalized are the ICT gains, the less likely are adverse distributional impacts for any class of workers. Because if doctors are displaced, then unskilled labor benefits from the reduction of costs of those services. Second, transfers from capital to labor and from old to young can prevent losses for those who would otherwise lose. And job training, labor market, labor sharing are also tools for spreading well-being in the face of these changes. But so is more leisure time, basically, which is one of the benefits that we should enjoy from having this ongoing technology revolution. So those are the main points I wanted to share. The last point I made on another slide, which is that for a poor country, these are not very relevant effects because there aren't sectors to be in decline other than agriculture itself. And so for poor countries, you have to take the starting point differently, and the likelihood of generalized benefit is much, much stronger with a technological boost in a poor country than it is in the United States. Thanks a lot, and back to you.
Thank you, Jeff, very much for a very informative overview and analysis. I'm going to take 1-2 comments because we are running behind schedule. So, who wants to make a comment? Okay, Len Waverman from Toronto McMaster University.
So, yeah, we economists are really bad at moving from the short term to the long term. So how realistic is it to say that, that all it takes is to have some adjustment policies or to tax the elderly who have the political power and redistribute to the young who don't vote? How realistic, I hear you, and it's absolutely correct, but how do we actually get this in practice?
And I'll collect also from Martha Murillo. Did Jeff, did you hear the question?
I heard that question, absolutely. And can we, if there's another question, take both, and I'll give an answer.
So I'm just gonna, so Marta Garcia Murillo from Syracuse University. Thank you for a really interesting presentation. And my question actually goes to the last part of your talk about developing countries because I'm working on a study about the impact of technology on jobs, specifically on Latin America, and the picture did not seem very pretty. I mean, it really, we have a population that is undereducated with very few technical skills and a very sadly bad educational system. So I see, on the contrary, even a worse potential impact on countries like, at least Latin America, which is the region I was looking at. So I was kind of a bit surprised about your more optimistic view from poor countries, which might be different.
Great.
Okay,
Thanks.
go
Let me
ahead,
take
Jeff.
Okay, yeah, let me quickly take both questions. Len's question, I don't know the answer. I do know that the generational politics will come more to the fore. Of course, older people, yours truly and others, vote. Young people haven't necessarily voted for a while. We've had a lot of redistribution from young to old. That's how our political system has worked since the New Deal. I'm certainly in favor of a lot of it, but at this point, I think actually the burden has to go in the other direction, and higher taxes on capital and higher estate taxes, wealth taxation, all are now on the table right now, but they're not in the United States. In the U.S., I should say, there's strong, about 65% public support, consistent for the last decade, for taxing the rich more. It's just that the median voter has no say in the United States. The only decile that matters is the top decile in influencing outcomes, and that's because of our campaign contribution system, which has corrupted American politics very, very deeply. So I don't know when the turn is going to come, but I do think that it's what's needed. What's needed doesn't make it happen necessarily, but often it becomes the basis for a new politics because it makes sense. And so I would tend to see those things arising more than, say, 25 years ago. The question about the developing countries, I think, is really quite interesting. And when I think of development, I think of Africa, because Latin America is so rich compared to the countries that I'm involved with mostly in Africa. But definitely the middle income countries, to the extent that they're competing certainly on manufacturing, are going to find that they will lose to the machines. So their export base absolutely could be diminished. To the extent that the education system is quite poor, which it is in a lot of Latin America, that also works poorly for Latin America. So I see why you have those worries. Asia, just scores at the top of the world, in fact, not only of developing countries, but of world in all of the science and math scores. And that's why their economies are booming from what I can see, which is that they really have a labor force that's complementary with advances in technology. So I agree with you. I shouldn't be glib about this. I do think Latin America's biggest single challenge is raising the quality of education for all, because traditionally it's not been for all, and until today it's not quality. And also training a lot more engineers and technologists, because Latin America is the world's leader in, I would say, in novelists, lawyers, humanists, and so forth. And those are great professions, but not necessarily well remunerated in this world that we're talking about. Although maybe they are the creative professions that will find some remuneration. So I take your point. What I really meant was that in the U.S., where you have a very advanced service economy, where we have 85% of the population in the service economy, we're going to see very significant shrinkage of the service sector in sales, in maintenance, surveillance, security, and in office operations. And so that's a very mature economy, and at least that kind of problem won't exist in Latin America. But what will exist is the relatively low level of quality of education.
Well, I would like to thank you, Jeff, for spending your evening in Paris with us. And we appreciate that. And I think that we're now ready to move to the lunch. This was our luncheon speaker. And we will now move to a...
We'll catch up soon. Thanks for including me.
Okay, thank you very much.